Welcome back to Building Better Businesses in ABA with me, Jonathan Mueller. It's a weekly podcast about the forces reshaping our autism services field. Learn from successful entrepreneurs, payers, investors, and leaders in applied behavior analysis. Thank you, kind listener, for letting me into your world today. Now on to the show. My name is Jonathan Mueller. I'm the host of Building Better Businesses in ABA podcast, and my guest today is Dr. Darren Sush. Dr. Sush is a licensed clinical psychologist and a BCBAD with nearly 20 years of experience developing and providing services based in ABA for children and adults diagnosed with autism and developmental disabilities. Darren is head of autism and psychology with Evernorth Behavioral Health, a Cigna corporation, and is a co-author of a workbook of ethical case scenarios in applied behavior analysis, first and second editions. He's an adjunct faculty member in the ABA program at Pepperdine and an associate professor in the ABA and clinical psychology programs at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Darren, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you, sir, for coming on. And there's only one place we can start. I mean, you have been in the field for decades. And when you got started in the field, you got punched in the face. Can you tell that story?
If it wasn't day one, it was pretty close to it. So I started working in ABA, not really on purpose. I think like a lot of people who kind of find the field, they jump into the field, maybe with a lot of not a lot of knowledge, not a lot of experience about what applied behavior analysis is or the work that we do or the populations. And I was certainly guilty of that. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, and I was working toward getting my doctorate in clinical psychology. And I wanted to work in the field. I wanted to work in the field of psychology while I was in school, gain some experience, kind of get a little bit more firsthand knowledge of the populations and people that I was hopefully going to be working with in the future. And at least at the time, one of the jobs that you could get without a whole bunch of letters after your name was working with families impacted by autism. So I linked up with an ABA company. Can't say that I really knew what that meant or what that meant I would be doing. And kind of went from there. And so, we had our orientations and things like that. But pretty early on, we, got sent out into the field to work with potential future clients or, kids that would be on our caseload as a direct staff member. And I went and I did an overlap with a staff member who was already working with this kid. And I think he was 4, but he was like a strong 4, like he lifts weights. He probably, maybe he did some CrossFit. I don't know. I think he had probably at least a brown belt. And so, I'm thinking I'm a couple years into my program for clinical psych and, always about like connecting with the people and, getting down, especially when you're working with kids, getting down on their level and everything. And, not really like understanding, like some people might not like that diagnosis or not. Some people just might not want you in their face. But I know better than everybody, of course. So I like lean down and I'm like, "Hey buddy, how's it going?" to try to like be cool and fun. And immediately punches me right in the face. Immediately punches me in the face. And I'm pretty sure I had a black eye. This is a 20-something-year-old story at this point, so I've probably embellished it a bit in my own mind at this point. But yeah, I definitely had a mark where people were asking me like, what happened? And it's not cool to say I got my butt kicked by a 4-year-old, or you can't really say like you should see the other guy because they're 4. But yeah, first day got punched. But like he was happy. He went about his day afterward, and I ended up actually working with this particular kid, and he was one of the also his best kids to work with, and we got along, a lot better after that. But yeah, it was my intro to the field, but it was actually not bad because it made it exciting. It made it interesting. It made me kind of like want to come back the next day to, see if I could do better, see what I did wrong, learn from what happened there, try to prove to myself I could do a little bit better too. And I got lucky. I think I really do. Like I got lucky in the first people, the first families, the first companies that I started working with were just really invested in doing good stuff. and really invested in good people. And it helped to kind of build like a love for the field that I didn't know I would have. It was kind of supposed to be just like a stopping point for me as like a, this is going to be a side gig a little bit while I go work towards something else. Um, and the more that I was still in my clinical psych program, but the more that I would like work with these families, the more that I would work with individuals from within the field and autistic individuals, the more I would find like when I'm talking about behavior analysis, I would have a little like bounce in my step, and I would really appreciate like the work and the field itself and the science and the practice and the gaining of additional knowledge and how you kind of are a detective in some cases too. Also, just the ultimate impact that we could have on people's lives and the tangible, quantifiable impact that we can have. That's sometimes a little bit more abstract in more kind of clinical psych type programs. So I still pursued my doctorate, and I still worked in that field for a very, very long time, and still I think consider myself that I do. But behavior analysis really did become a big part of my heart and a big part of my focus, and is really like the main thing that I do at this point.
I love that story on so many levels, not least which you have the street cred, right? Like, you've been in
Oh,
the arena,
yes.
but you have a passion for the kiddos that you served, and that just speaks to, like, the heart of what our field is. The other really interesting thing about you, Darren, I think to one of my co-founders at Ascend, Dr. Mike Wright, who's both a psychologist and a BCBA. He's not a BCBAD like you are, but we always called him a purple unicorn because there's so few. But tell me, what has, being a psychologist, in addition to being a BCBA-D, what has that brought to your practice and your understanding of kiddos with autism?
I really am grateful for it because a lot of people, especially those who have kind of grown within this field, might go the other direction, right? So they kind of start with behavior analysis, especially those who have doctorates in behavior analysis. But I kind of started on the doctoral path in clinical psych first, and then kind of came into the ABA world and went and did additional work to gain whatever credentials that were necessary. And I really do appreciate that because one of the things I found myself saying a lot, especially as I grew in the field and started to get more kind of managerial or supervisory roles, is not to limit the diagnoses, right? So there's characteristics, of course, and behaviors and things that we look for that will contribute to an individual being kind of characterized with a particular diagnosis. And I think what happens, because most of the work that I do as a behavior analyst is with individuals with autism, one thing that happens with autistic individuals is a lot of people who work not necessarily just as behavior analysts, but just work with the population often forget that they're more than just the diagnosis. And it sounds so cheesy to say because so many people say that, but they almost pigeonhole their clinical thinking of when we're talking about an individual with autism. We're talking about an autistic individual. So I remember even years ago saying, just because they have a diagnosis of autism doesn't mean they can't also be depressed, right? Doesn't mean they can't also feel anxious or nervous, right? Even if it's not, forgetting even if they meet criteria for major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder, like put that on the shelf, right? Because these are all just, again, they're labeled based on a set of characteristics. What contributes to that diagnosis is what's more important. But I think my training as a clinical psychologist has really helped me that even when my focus might be more on the more specific aspects of the autism diagnoses, and whether we want to call that remediating or supporting or helping to build skill sets in that area, my clinical psych training has also taught me to think about, well, how might this be impactful to the overall life of this individual? And what other contributing factors might be either aiding or exacerbating some of these other symptoms, even if I personally might not be a component in working with those or helping those or supporting those areas.
One of the things is you've, developed your career as both a licensed clinical psychologist and BCBAD, and then have progressed to, being head of autism and psychology at Evernorth/Cigna. That involves moving outside of maybe your traditional clinical wheelhouse, right? Into
Yeah.
administrative and operational roles. And I think we
Mhm.
see this a lot with leaders in our field, right? You start off as a BC, I am not a BCBA to be, full disclosure. But you see it beyond healthcare too, right? People are good doers and then they're like thrust into managerial leadership roles. What was your learning journey like? And what was your experience in moving into those? administrative and managerial
Yeah.
leadership roles?
Our field is really interesting, and it's not unique to just our field, but one of the interesting aspects of our field is that the more experience you gain, often the less actual direct involvement you have with the individuals that you're serving or however you want to call it. So, and we see that with just kind of the multi-tiered model for behavior analytic treatment, right? So, or treatment based in behavior analysis. So we have, you're the RBT, you're the boots on the ground, you're the one who's directly involved. And to an extent, you probably have the best insight into the goings on for that individual, but you don't necessarily have the clinical intuition or decision making responsibility just yet. That's the BCBA who's going every once in a while, or hopefully a good amount of time and observing, but they're not typically the ones doing all of that direct work. They might do some, but certainly not all. And then you kind of keep kind of floating farther and farther away. So it does take um, some motivation to continue the farther you drift from that direct person you're connected with to still make sure you're involved. If we think about, how I've kind of moved from and now I'm in more like a managerial or like administrative role, um, I think I'm too old to like jump on the ground and like start, having fun and making behavior analytic services like actually useful and fun and interesting for kids anymore. I'm going to get tired super quick and my back's going to hurt and all that kind of stuff. So I got like 15 minutes in me before I'm like, okay, there, there you go. So, I'll leave that to somebody else. And I don't feel like getting punched in the face anymore uh, by anybody. So maybe that part's not really where my skill set lies anymore. But one of the things that I found that I do really enjoy doing is kind of overseeing and seeing from bigger pictures and kind of looking at like the different angles that you often don't see when you're in the valley. So you have a much better view of other aspects when you're looking from a different vantage point. And I do enjoy doing that. I think that's a skill set to develop that a lot of BCBAs and up start to grow. Um, I also think just for the progress of the field and the dissemination of the field, it's important to speak to individuals who are outside of our language point. I love going to like the CAS conference or ABAI or Calabo. Those are the conferences, that I really enjoy, APBA's conference, and they're great to go to. And I try to go as much as possible, whenever they're offered. But a lot of times we're speaking to ourselves in those conferences. And that's kind of the point, is to share and disseminate information amongst ourselves and continue best practices. But we also need to have ways of making sure that those outside the field are listening to us. And that's kind of one of the most important parts of my role in my current position, is because I'm sure, a lot of people who are listening to this and work with insurance companies or whatever your funding source is, they've had the experience of kind of explaining the treatment plan or talking about their proposal. And the person they're talking to doesn't know behavior analysis, or, maybe not, doesn't even know the diagnosis of autism. So having a seat at the table and having representation to help to dictate and designate policy for these types of services takes talking to people who aren't us.
I like that. In other words, make sure we're getting feedback from those outside our field and getting a broader understanding, whether around medical or other healthcare related issues or just other skill set domains like supervision. I'm curious if you had like a mentor who really helped you to think through that and what impact they had on you.
Yeah, I think I've had a bunch, fortunately. And, the idea of a mentor, a lot of people think it's like that one person who's kind of, and for many people, this what it is. It's like that one person who you can call and rely on, or they're with you along the way. And I've certainly had that, like people that I know, if something comes up, I'm going to call them. Right. And they are reliable and they will provide me with kind of the support and guidance of the yeses and many times the nos that I need to hear. But then I've also had kind of like mini mentors where it's just, this is my friend who I know knows this good information or can talk to me about a particular issue or case or concern, or just about the field and things that are interesting and cool about the field. And I also kind of consider all those individuals as mentors too, even if they're not like overseeing everything that I'm doing.
I love it. That's the exact same way I've approached it. Similarly, I've had fantastic mentors, individual mentors over the course of my life who have like longitudinally stayed with me. And there's this notion that I heard you describe, Darren, about the importance of actively cultivating what is this mini mentor network, people who have specific skill sets or knowledge of different areas that you can tap into. And that takes cultivation, right? It takes investing in the relationship over time in order to get out of that relationship what you've put into it, which I think is very similar to payer provider relationships, right? You get out as an ABA provider or as a payer, you get out of that relationship what you put into it. As being head of autism at Cigna, I know one of the things that you present on is how to appropriately advocate. And you use this line with me once about like the data should be your advocacy. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I find myself saying this a lot. It's let your data do talking, and it's not anything like snazzy or unique. That's what the field of ABA really relies upon, right? We're a data-based field, somewhat to the point where people will call us, data nerds or behavior nerds, and we can be so focused on it. But the data demonstrates the progress that you're showing, or the progress that's being observed with the individual, or the lack of progress. It will help you identify the barriers in treatment, areas that you need to focus on, areas that you could put on a shelf for a little bit. So, that's why data has become so integrated within the field of behavior analysis. And there's the cautionary tale is that we forget that integral aspect of our field when we then start to request, propose, or ask for authorizations and funding for services. Um, Oftentimes, we can very easily forget that the people who we're presenting this information to or presenting this request to are not there with you. They don't know this individual. They're not there doing observations. They don't have access. They don't have your password to your database software system, whatever your cloud system, whatever you're using. They are not there with you and your RBTs kind of talking about, oh my gosh, here's the challenges that just happened. How are we going to do about this? What's the next target we should implement? Because this is the one that's going to really be the most impactful. So the only way to communicate the continued need for service is by sharing the information, by sharing that data. And sometimes there's differences of opinion, right? Sometimes the reviewer will look at the treatment plan, the plan of care, the data that's presented, and see something in that differently than what you're hoping to present. Either it's just a clear difference of opinion, or it's being interpreted maybe incorrectly, right? Or it's maybe not even being presented in a way that's understandable to that outside observer. Um, so then I think the helpful thing as an advocate for the person you're working with is to look back and not say, okay, I get this. They should too, but I get this. What are they not getting and why might they not? And how do I communicate this in a way that's effective? It becomes very easy to get angry, and it becomes very easy to get loud. And a lot of that anger and a lot of that loudness comes from passion, it comes from care, and comes from a good place. But the loudest voice doesn't necessarily act as the best advocate, right? And depending on who you're speaking with as the funding source, they can take that as a call to action and really say, wow, this person's really championing for this individual and really cares. Let me take another listen. Or you might get someone who's just insulted, unfortunately, because you're dealing with human beings, right? And say, well, I'm not going to sit here and get yelled at. And I guess this is a no, right? And of course, hopefully that doesn't happen. But I'm sure if you're a provider and you've met with a funding source person, I'm sure that's happened. If your data demonstrates what you think it should, right? If your data demonstrates the need for care or the progress within services or the lack of progress and the identified barriers, then your data will do the talking. And all you have to do is help to translate it, help to expose it, and help to make sure that it's seen. If you're just yelling, you're passionate, which is great, but you're not communicating.
You're not communicating, and your data, you're not giving the reviewer potentially a chance to understand the data, as you point out, in the way that they do. And super importantly, we are all freaking human beings, right? We should be throwing kindness around like confetti and recognizing that these are going to be multiple iteration relationships. So I think it's really well said. Well, let me throw out there, I know you see a lot of providers doing a lot of great work, but sometimes your reviewers might get feedback like, "Oh, my parents are lawyers, So they should get better services.
Ye
What's your feedback on that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, and that does happen a lot, and again, I think it comes with I need to advocate, so I'm gonna throw everything I can, including the kitchen sink, to make sure that the reviewer hears what I'm saying and hopefully approves this so I can just go and do my job, right? That's really what it comes down to. I just wanna do my job, and you're kind of in the way as a reviewer. Um, which I get. But the point of the review, and this is similar with most other fields who get funding from anywhere, is to ensure that quality services are being delivered to the individuals that need those quality services, right? And to ensure, especially for individuals that have an autism diagnosis, that we're not kind of using the autism as, oh, the lack of progress. Well, of course they have autism, right? Well, no, that's not an excuse. That's not following the data in an appropriate way. So making sure that we're not blaming the individual for the lack of progress, but that we're working to be of support to them. But what does happen sometimes is there's may in their efforts for advocacy say, well, parents are lawyers and we would hate to have to, take legal action if this isn't approved. Or they're very important people, so you might be more strong about considering approving this. And I get that and I appreciate that. Again, it's a form of advocacy. It may not necessarily be the one that I appreciate the most, but I do appreciate where that's coming from. But the challenge for me with that is I would hate to say that individuals who maybe don't have that familial connection to power, right, are then less likely to get the needed and appropriate services because they don't have the provider who's willing to say, hey, their parents are lawyers or they own a big company or they're from this neighborhood or what have you. Because in my mind, every individual has the right to appropriate services regardless of who, what, and where they are, right? So I wouldn't want to be doing more or less due diligence for that person because of the zeros in the bank account or the credentials of the people connected to them.
I mean, that's where it becomes an equity issue, right? And to your point, like we're in our field, we're all so passionate about getting kiddos the services they need, right? And just channeling that in the right way feels important. And I'm curious if you have any other tips or tricks, not that this is a clinical podcast, but tips or tricks for BCBAs who are going to advocate for their kiddos, in addition to using data, in addition to maybe not pulling that, the parents or lawyer cards, et cetera. Because I know, Cigna does have a reputation for being a little harder on getting authorizations. Any other tips or tricks
Mhm.
you can share?
Yeah. So I like to hear and I don't like to hear that we're a little bit harder, but I also think that we have like a clinical intuition that we hope to uphold and an expectation of the field that we hope to uphold. I'm a BCBAD. We have 5 peer reviewers, not including myself, 4, which are also BCBADs. We've all worked within the field. We've all been providers ourselves and kind of been on the other side of the table. And one of the things I'm always conscious of is if I do my job well as a behavior analyst, hopefully that's going to represent the field well. That's going to be really great for the clients that I'm serving. It's going to be impactful for the families. And, the ripples of that drip will expand somewhat. But it's not going to expand a whole bunch, to be honest, right? Because not a lot of people are going to hear about this. Not a lot of people are going to know about it. There'll be an impact to various others' lives, but it'll be regulated. If I do something wrong, if I do something unethical, if I do something risky, if I do something harmful, right? Oh my gosh, you might as well toss a boulder in the lake. That's going to be so impactful, not just to that individual who's getting harmed, the person of most importance, but think about that to the representation and reputation of the field, right? That means that we all have to now account for this one agency who's, doing X, Y, and Z, or that one BCBA who did these things and now has to, follow suit because of it. We're all now trying to say, well, that's not ABA, or this is what appropriate ABA looks like. Um, and even thinking about people who might have otherwise access services, right? I really think my kid could benefit from ABA services, but oh my gosh, is this what the field does? And then that kid might go without, or that individual might go without services. So the impact of improper, unethical, clinically problematic treatment is 1,000 times more challenging than, someone doing a great job. So, and I think that's part of where the review process is not that, we want to take a red pen to people's reports, or even that we can handhold and guarantee, you know, good service, right? Because again, we're not there, but it's one way of helping to ensure kind of the process is appropriate. I guess to reiterate, if we're thinking about tips and tricks, it's kind of easy. Be clear. Write down, what are you doing with this individual? What does your active intervention look like for them? And put that in the plan. If it's in the plan, guess what? No one wants to talk to me as a reviewer. If it's in the plan, I don't have to ask you about it. If you're clear, if you have operational definitions of your goals, if they're clearly defined and measurable, and I can get a reasonable understanding of what you're doing within the services, and the data is there with dates, you're starting off at a great point. It's not, that doesn't guarantee too much, right? But it starts you off 1,000 leagues ahead of where you would if that stuff isn't there. One of the things, actually was just saying this the other day on a call, is, progress is hoped for, right? We hope that with the work that we're doing, we'll see skill development goals, expand and be able to, master out targets and see some nice goals there. We'll see behavior reduction goals in there, and we'll see the behaviors reduced, replacement behaviors. Sometimes progress is slow and small. Sometimes progress is a plateau, right? The expectation, I think, for the field, and I think from our perspective, I can't speak for every funder, but is not everyone's progress is going to look the same. And sometimes it might not look like progress at all. But what are you as the provider identifying from this? So if there's a barrier to treatment, if there's something, we've been trying this for a really long time and we're just not seeing too many gains. If there's a reduction in assessment scores, right? Submitting that in and just kind of saying, well, hopefully they don't catch it, which is, I don't think what providers do, but maybe, but submitting it in with explanation as the clinical professional who's really good at what you do, right? What's your intuition as to this, lack of progress? I'm using air quotes for people who can. What's your clinical intuition as to what might be some of the challenges? And what are you doing with that as a clinician who's trained as a behavior analyst, who has years of schooling and experience under your belt? What are you doing to address this? That's awesome, right? If you're doing that, we can't really expect too much more. At some point, maybe you might say, I think we've maximized our benefit with this individual, which is really hard to get to. But if you're asking yourselves those questions, then it's understandable if maybe the progress isn't as clearly defined, as long as you're thinking about it.
Well, I want to double click on something you said that I think that ABA providers don't get. And I don't know what the estimates are, something like 7,000 ABA organizations, latest count in the US. And that is, you know, you are having to solve as a funder for a wide range of quality of providers. And yes, we've got
Yeah.
some awesome providers. And I like to think that, the work I've done in my career with Ascend and others, like, we're great providers, but you've got a bell curve. And so you have to solve for the entirety of the bell curve, not just those who we know are doing the right things. And so I wonder if you speak a little
Yeah.
bit to that and to the partnership with the Behavioral Health Center of Excellence they recently entered into to advance quality in our field.
So, unfortunately, having letters after your name doesn't guarantee you're good at what you do. Uh, I would love it to be the case. I remember I was teaching, this was, oh my gosh, this was a lot of years ago. And it was a doctoral psychology course. And the students were like, well, why are we doing these assignments? This was one particular assignment. I don't even remember what it was. I was like, well, because when you're out in the field, and you're working with an individual and you're kind of assisting them with important aspects of their life, they're just going to see, PsyD or PhD after your name. And there's an assumption of competence that comes with that. And competence is the bare minimum. We could do a whole conversation about that. So, there's an expectation, especially because we work in the human service field, that we have an understanding of the things that we do and we represent those letters well. So before I came into this position, I had done peer reviews, meaning that I was the person requesting the hours and the time, and was not happy with with my experience with that, which is part of why I wanted this job. But I hadn't kind of had the opportunity to, speak with providers outside of the circles that I was privy to. And I was fortunate in that the people who I was connected with were awesome, right? Like, I would go to a conference and everyone's like excited about behavior analysis and there's amazing presentations and people are taking notes for the most part, right? Some people are, online shopping, but for the most part, people are invested and that's why they're there, right? So it's, oh my gosh, everyone loves the field and everyone's amazing. The companies that I worked for got lucky in that I worked for some really amazing companies who had really smart and clinically intuitive professionals. So when I got into this role, I was kind of of the mindset of like, okay, why do these reviewers have to badger these really good providers? Just get out of the way. You're just kind of creating a roadblock to getting services. And one of the nice things about my job is that I get to speak with behavior analysts, the majority with which fall into that first category of being amazing providers. Maybe there was an issue with the treatment plan, it just didn't get communicated in a way that was, initially understandable, or we just get the chance to chat and outside of like a review. Um, but one thing that did open my mind and my eye to was there are certainly those providers who represent the field in a way that would be disheartening to others. And again, by no means is the insurance peer review the catch all for that, or the ultimate protection, or even the solution to that, because it can't be. It's too reactive. It's not the right place. It's not the right connection. Um, but it's part of that process of getting connected with providers who are either maybe unintentionally not doing the best of work for the people, and can use some support and guidance, or needing some issues here or there, more viewed or regulated.
I really appreciate that nuanced approach and the range of things that a funder has to solve for that individual ABA provider might not see. Now, I know you're also super committed to advancing quality in our field. Can you talk a little bit about the Behavioral Health Center of Excellence partnership that you
Yeah.
just recently entered into?
Yeah, sorry, thank you. So we did enter into a partnership or relationship with Behavioral Health Center of Excellence, BHCOE. And one of the reasons that we wanted to connect with them is to help to better identify and to a sense quantify how do we define quality services in behavior analysis, and maybe even get to what services, what aspects of the field, what aspects of the services that we provide help to lead to higher quality, more efficient, more effective outcomes. How do we help to increase that prognosis in a way that's meaningful to the individuals that we hope to work with and we hope to serve? Um, so the partnership with BHCOE is, they have an amazing reputation. They have access to providers, both who are accredited and who are not accredited. Their reputation kind of speaks for itself. And one of the things that we look at is how do we look into the aspects of behavior analysis that are important and that we can promote? How do we, as a funding source, help providers to engage in these practices in a more meaningful way that either relieves some of the red tape in doing so, that promotes and reinforces them when they engage in these practices? And then eventually, I think, how do we help families and individuals find these providers to help to increase the status quo, increase that competence of the field, and raise the bar?
In full disclosure, I am one of the biggest, most passionate supporters of BHCOE. Ascend has gone through like 6+ voluntary accreditation, re-accreditation rounds, from full accreditation to telehealth to practicum site. I just think this is a really important third-party external validation. And so I'm really excited for that partnership. But tell me, Darren, what do you think would have to be true, whether in this partnership or in the field more broadly, when value-based care and or a centers of excellence concept can actually make sense?
Yeah. So I think that's what a lot of this is kind of leading toward, right? Is how do we appropriately, ethically, responsibly start to talk about value-based care within the field? And value-based care isn't something new. A lot of funders have this, but it's fairly new, I think, in the ABA world. And as we start having more and more services funded through managed care, through insurance, it's the natural progression of kind of what contracting could potentially look like. One of the things that was important to myself, and I think I could speak for kind of the royal we of Cigna Evernorth, is that we didn't want to be the sole source for establishing what it means to be a quality ABA provider, or what aspects go into identifying a quality ABA provider. For one, we're the funding source, right? So just from kind of a looks perspective, it could be seen as having a certain, the priorities might be one thing versus the other. But we also only have a certain view, right? We're looking from only one direction as the funding source. So having the partnership with BHCOE, and then we had work groups with providers that volunteer to work with them and provide feedback, which is really our greatest source of information in this project so far, of how do we establish what it means to be that quality ABA provider. Now, what that might mean as far as translating to, value-based care contracting, we're so early in this process, so I don't have definitive answers what, this contract is going to look like, and, what the opt-in, opt-out type of thing will be. The likelihood is, if you like the way things are now, you like, the contracting search situation, you like the fee for service as it is at the moment, there's no force in as far as value-based, right? In most cases, these are providers who are very actively asking for something like this, and saying, can we do this? Do you want to start this with us? Let's get this going right now. But there are certainly those providers who they're just not comfortable with it, or they don't want to do anything like this just yet. And I think there's going to be room for them there as well. But the question becomes, how do you distinguish providers who it would be appropriate to implement value-based care? And I think that's where the partnership with BHCOE comes in, because you want to have a value-based care contract with providers who are really adding value to the field, who are distinguished, who are implementing quality care. One of the many things that I have a very big passion and focus on that we take into consideration in establishing these quality metrics, and then kind of helping to identify these providers who meet that need and ultimately kind of help to gain those more preferred outcomes, is how do we account for individuals or provider groups who work with individuals who have very severe behavior challenges, or who have more profound deficits, or older individuals, because we know that earlier age services tend to have better prognosis. The concern may be that provider organizations might feel as though they only can work with those populations if they're going to be considered with value-based contracts. We don't want to create kind of service deserts for those other very needed populations. So creating opportunity, incentive, motivation for those providers to continue to work in those areas and still be considered as identifications of quality and outcome and value-based contracting.
Well said. I mean, sort of this idea of risk adjustment, right, for more profound autism, and how do you account for that? I got to tell you, Darren, the moment that you and Sarah at BHCOE come up with these, like, I'll be the first one to volunteer that I want to go into a value-based model. I just think this idea of fee for service is like, just think about it in a behavior analytic terms. You bill more hours and you get paid more. Like it doesn't seem like there's alignment
Yeah.
there to ultimately the kiddos you're serving, the family you're serving, the payer is stakeholder, the provider. So I think about it as sucking at the teat of fee for service, which is probably an inelegant, whatever. But anyway, I am passionate about it. I can't wait to see where this ends up.
Yeah. And if you think about it, if anything else, even from like, if putting aside like the financial aspects that will likely go into this, and I'm not the financial person, so I probably can't speak too well to that, but even just the predictability that will afford, I would imagine, not only the funders, but providers, right? One of the challenges that we have as a field is maintaining staff. And you can't blame them. We can't guarantee, hey, you're going to be able to get X number of hours and pay your rent or your mortgage. It becomes really hard for that individual to continue working at the company or to dedicate whatever hours are there. So if we have something that helps to support more predictability, then you can have staff availability in a way that is in line with that and feel more comfort there. That's the hope. I can't guarantee all of that, but that's kind of one of the hopes that will come out of some of these projects.
Well said. Well, what's one thing, Darren, that every ABA business owner should start doing and one thing to stop doing?
Oh, start doing. So one of the things that can't say that this is going to be the thing that opens the door to potential for value-based contracting or anything. But one of the things that I really do value, and when I hear providers say that they're already doing this, is collecting their own data when it comes to quality indicators in the services that they're providing and outcome metrics. This is something that you can do whether you're just maybe like a smaller organization with one office, or if you have kind of multiple offices across various locations. If you're collecting data, not just on each individual that you're serving, but doing a little bit more comparative data, then that's really interesting to see and helpful to see from our perspective, because it means that you're dedicated and focused toward ensuring quality. And then it also helps you to kind of account for if there are challenges that might come up. It's a great way of being proactive. If you see, okay, well, the Albuquerque office, we're seeing these numbers, they don't seem to be the same as the New Jersey office. What are we doing differently across these offices that might be impacting this change? Could it be that, the individuals that we serve in those locations are just have different needs? Yes. Okay. That you have a great answer to that. Could it be that, we've been doing these supervision meetings once every 2 weeks in New Jersey, but not in Albuquerque? I wonder if that has some type of a relationship there. What kind of magic can we take from one to put to the other that's going to help, increase our organizational strength overall? So that's really nice to see when I hear providers doing that. I don't know if that's just the nerd in me that appreciates that, or if that's good from kind of the business perspective. Um, Things to not do. I don't know if there's a thing to not do, but maybe this is another thing to do, is make your clinical decisions based on the individual you're working with, right? And I think that's nothing like outlandish or, unique to say, but if you're making a recommendation for intensity of services, if you're implementing particular goals, if you're going to choose an assessment measure, do the one that you feel is right for this individual. Do the things that you feel are going to be of best support to that person, and putting the client first. And if you are taking that first step, then the rest of the stairway will likely open up. But if you're not, then you're just going to trip.
I love it. Darren, where can people find you online?
So you can email me. I do have a website, but it's actually it's my website for my old private practice that I no longer run, but it's there if you ever want to check it out. It's drdarrensush.com. So you'll see me smiling. So that's one way to do that. You could also email me. Feel free to do so. Darren.sush@evernorth.com. You can also email my Pepperdine account, darren.sush@pepperdine.edu.
All right, sir. Well, are you ready for the hot take questions?
Sure.
Darren, you're on your deathbed. What's the one thing you want to be remembered for?
Oof. Oh gosh. I wasn't expecting an Oprah moment on this one. I have two daughters. I have two kids. And if they remember me as being there for them, everything else is just extra. If my daughters and my wife remember me as there, then that's the top. Everything else is icing.
As a fellow father of two daughters and a son, amen, brother. Well, what's your most important self-care practice?
Um, so I'm very lucky in that I do get to spend a lot of time with my family. I've been able to kind of negotiate my time in a way that family work life balance thing, not always perfect for, there's always that time where I'm kind of, here or there and thinking I'm supposed to be in the other place when I'm in the one. Um, but that from a, like filling the cup perspective, that's the main one, for sure. The unhealthy self-care practice, but it's still self-care. There's a term for this, and I read about it, and I can't recall it off the top of my head, but it's when you should go to bed, but you stay up and watch TV anyway for way too long. And you're like, I'm literally falling asleep. Should I go to bed? It is kind of a polar opposite because in one sense, I'm saying, that time with the family is so important. And the other is like, but I also need that last little, half hour to an hour at night where I could just like zone, and watch some TV or whatnot. That's helpful. Not healthy, but helpful.
Right. Same thing. I need that third episode of the House of Dragons, right? Yes, okay. And it's only 1 a.m. I can go to 2. Oh, I hear
Yeah.
you, man. What's your favorite song?
Oh, favorite song. That is a question I don't know if I can answer because all my music now is what my kids are listening to. Um, it's a lot of Taylor Swift, a lot of Harry Styles, and I would be lying if I'm not like, okay, you guys want to put on some Taylor Swift, some Harry Styles? You want to maybe listen to that? They're like, no, Dad. And I'm like, you sure? Well, let's put it on. So it's really for me. Um, but yeah, so that's what's I'm getting a lot of holiday music around this time of year right now too, and they really love that stuff. But yeah, those are probably their two big ones right now.
Oh my gosh, we have spitting image households. We cannot get enough of the new T Swift. If you give your 18-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a good one. I find that one hard because, that hindsight is a very difficult thing. And I'm very much um, in the understanding that you make the decisions in the context that you're in and with the information that you have available to you at that time. So my natural thought when hearing that question maybe is the pessimistic one of like, oh, don't do this again. What mistakes to kind of correct? But I find, while those mistakes have certainly happened in life, um, and definitely did not make good decisions everywhere, I think they all led me to a good place and a place with not to, get Ashton Kutchery, but to butterfly affect it, right? Things that probably at the time seemed horrible led me to a place where I'm here with my family and doing a job that I love in a field that I love and get to talk to people. Keep going, I guess, would be, that advice. Anything else, I wouldn't want to break the wheel.
Powerfully said. All right, last question. You can only wear one style of footwear. What is it?
Sneakers. Yeah, that's my go-to. Working from home helps with that. Good pair of cool looking Adidas. I'm in good shape.
Right on, brother. As behind you for our listeners, there's two amazing pink skateboards and then this beautiful kind of mural with a neon pink welcome to the jungle sign. So I don't know if that's a GNR tribute or not, but it resonates, man.
Nice.
Hey, Darren, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing all of your knowledge. I appreciate you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Hey, kind listener. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, can you do me a favor? Give me a rating on your favorite podcast channel. It helps more values-aligned people like you find the pod. Till next time, peace.
What does a baby computer call its dad? Dada.